Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to preserve the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. We have a very special guest today who is not born in Wadsworth, who hasn't lived in Wadsworth for many, many years, as most of our guests have, but he has made such an impact on Wadsworth that we feel that we have to have him actually here for the people of 2050, 2060, to know who he was. This is Reverend Dan Doty from United Church of Christ. And the reason we're going to interview him today is that with much regret, he's going to be leaving Wadsworth and going somewhere else to grace those people. Dan, you know, everyone here in Wadsworth probably knows what you are, but we don't know who you are. Now, if you could only start from the time of your birth, now you can skip the prenatal if you want to, but from the time of your birth, where you were born, parents, siblings, and things like that. Just give it a start and see where we go.
All right. Well, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate being here to consider my impact or my part of being in the Wadsworth community. I was born in Columbus Grove, Ohio. It's a small town.
Columbus Grove, right?
Columbus Grove, yes.
Southwest of Columbus, isn't it?
No, that's Grove City.
Oh, Grove City.
Most folks think that's, when I say Columbus Grove, most folks go there as
wait,
well.
that's in eastern Ohio, then, isn't it?
It's up in northwestern Ohio, near Lima.
Well, we got I'm one for two here.
Well, it's just up in Putnam County, and I actually was born in Lima Memorial Hospital. But my dad had 3 sisters and 4 brothers. They're all from Columbus Grove. And even now, 50 years later, it's hard to go back to Columbus Grove and not trip over a Doty every other street.
Really?
You go through, yeah. So it was a wonderful community to grow up in. Very small, about 2,500 people. 2 stoplights, and they probably didn't need those most days.
You know, as I remember, my one cousin lived in Columbus Grove.
Okay.
Yes, this was many, many years ago. His wife died there. She was only about 25 or 30 years old, and
wow.
she died of some horrible disease. And then he moved away from there. He was a pharmacist there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was a wonderful community to grow up in. I had a graduating class of 96.
96.
96, and I think only 3 or 4 of them didn't start in kindergarten with us. We all sort of kept together and knew each other, and so it was a wonderful community to grow up in too. I left there to go to Bowling Green State University. My parents still live there. You did ask about my parents.
Are you allowed to tell us what year you were born?
I was born in 1966, so this is my
1966.
My 50th anniversary of my birth this year.
50th anniversary of your birth. Wow, that's wonderful.
Right. I have an older brother who was born a couple years before me and was a couple years ahead of me in school. He now lives in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Moved around a bit. He works in TV for most of his professional life. So he lives in Johnstown, about 3.5 hours away from us now, which is nice to be able to be. That's the closest he's ever been to us. So we get to see him on Christmas Eve.
So you have only one brother, is that right?
I just have the one brother. Yep.
What is his name?
His name is Jim, James Andrew. My dad's name was Jim as well, so we always called my brother Andy.
Andy.
So he was always Andy to me growing up, but when he went to school, he wanted to be Jim, so all of his school friends know him as Jim. So even now,
you have 3 brothers. You have Jim, you have Andy,
and Andrew. Absolutely, it's an interesting thing, but he's a great guy. We're the best of friends now. We had the typical adolescent angst among us, rivalry amongst us, and but now we're best of friends and enjoy seeing one another and our families.
And are your parents still living?
They are. In fact, they're coming this weekend for my final service at Trinity. So they will be here. They're about 2.5 hours is how far it is to get to Columbus Grove. So they'll come over on Saturday. As long as Dad said he could watch the Ohio State game, he would come over Saturday early. So we're going to do that on Saturday.
I had the pleasure of sitting with your mother at one of our dinners. I'd forgotten which one it was many years ago. And thoroughly enjoyed her. She's a delightful person, and she told us a lot of little secrets about you, and I won't reveal them unless you do.
Okay, and we may not have enough time for all of this.
Right, that's right.
And I think her memory may be clouded, or I like to think maybe it is, but she probably tells the truth.
No, she told the truth. She told the truth. We verified it.
Wonderful. Well, so I left there and went to Bowling Green State University as a music student, and met my wife, now Amy.
And what was Amy's maiden name?
Amy was Dean.
Amy Dean.
Amy Susan Dean. And so she didn't have to change any of her monogram sweaters. She still had the same last initial.
Well, that's good.
And she's down from near Marion, Ohio. In Waldo is her actual
Waldo?
address. Waldo.
That's even smaller than Columbus
Even
Grove.
smaller than Columbus Grove, yes. But so we got married in 1987. So we're on 29 years. Next
29
year will be
years already.
30 years for us, absolutely.
Oh.
So I graduated in 1991 from Bowling Green State University with a degree in music education. And I got my first teaching job in Monroeville,
Which is also smaller.
which is also a very small school, very small community. I had every student from kindergarten through 12th grade in music.
Now, that was close to Toledo, was it?
Actually, it's near Norwalk.
Norwalk.
Now, when we go home to see our friends or go back to Bowling Green to see our friends there, we go right through Monroeville on 20. So yeah, it's still a beautiful little town, and I passed that school and think about my years there.
Yep.
That I spent 2 years teaching music there, vocal music. And enjoyed that. Moved on from there and went to Sandusky City Schools and taught there for a couple years.
Oh, the big city.
The big city, absolutely.
What, 20,000?
Yeah. I remember thinking, though, that I still lived in Bowling Green, so I had an hour commute to work, and didn't save myself any time when I went from Monroeville to Sandusky. They're about the same distance. But after that first school, I started thinking that, is this all there is? Is this what I'm meant to do? And I started to think about other things, and ministry kept coming back into my head. So after my first year of teaching in Sandusky, which was my third year of teaching total, I sort of perceived a call into ministry and answered that, and decided to apply to seminaries and apply to my church that I was working in at the time to be a candidate.
Which church was that?
It was the United Methodist Church. My wife was a Methodist, and I married into a Methodist family, and I was attending a Methodist church in college, singing in the choir. So when I felt my call to ministry, I was in the Methodist context. I did grow up, however, in the United Church of Christ back in Columbus.
Oh, is that
Grove.
right? Mm-hmm.
I grew up in the United Church of Christ, yeah. That was my home church. So, but I went through the Methodist system, went to seminary, signed up to go to Garrett Evangelical, which is in the Chicago area, in Evanston, so right on the campus of Northwestern University. But not a part of the university at all, just a separate thing.
Right.
But right on the lake, right on Sheridan Road, right on Lake Michigan. So it was a beautiful setting. Spent 3 years there in seminary while I was pastoring a church. I was a student pastor in a little town, even smaller than any of the towns we've talked about, the town of Ashcombe, Illinois.
Oh, my heavens.
Now, Ashcombe was an Iroquois Indian chief, the only town we know of that has his name as a town.
Ashcombe?
Ashcombe, A-S-H-K-U-M, Ashcombe.
A-S-H-K-U-M.
K-U-M.
Wow.
It's on the State Route 57 from Chicago down to Springfield, just south of Kankakee, Illinois. So a nice little community, 650 people total.
The whole thing.
In the whole
and probably they were all Methodists, were they?
Nope, there was a Catholic church, a Lutheran church, and a Methodist church.
Wow.
So if you weren't Catholic or Lutheran, by default you were Methodist. But it was a lovely community of people. They nurtured me, they loved me, they formed me, they took care of myself and my family, and we dearly love them and still have contact with a lot of the folks in that congregation. And it was a blessed time. I was there for 6 years total. At 5 years, as you know, the Methodist Church moves their pastors around every 5 to 6 years.
Same with ours.
Yep. At 5 years, I was the longest serving pastor they ever had, and I was there 6 years. So I'm not sure. I don't think my streak has been broken yet. But I went back there maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and they had their 150th anniversary. So I was a part of that celebration, and as they remembered their history and remembered my time with them. But after that, my wife had gotten a job at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and I couldn't get back in the Methodist system back to Indiana or even Ohio that year, so we actually lived for a year apart.
Oh,
And
really?
She lived in Muncie for the week and came home on weekends.
Now, what did she teach at Muncie?
She taught music education courses.
She was also a music education major.
She was working on her PhD. When I was in seminary, she was at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
Did she finally get her PhD then?
She did not. She moved away from the university setting, and the project she was doing just kind of fizzled, and she didn't get much participation. And it's one of those things that life kind of brought us onto something else, and so she made the decision. We made the decision not to sort of finish that, and she left the university setting teaching, which she loved, and went back to public school, which was, I think, her first love, teaching in the public schools. So, but we lived apart that year when she was in Muncie for the first year, and I remained with the children in Ashcombe, serving the church. I was still going to school part-time. And
now, you mentioned children. How many children, and when were they born, and who are they? Be sure to get the right names.
We have 3 children. Our oldest is Christian. She is 27 this year.
27?
27. She is a CPA and works for a firm in the Valley in Akron, and just bought her first house.
Oh, really?
Her employer is building a new building out in the White Pond area, and she currently has a 4-minute commute to work, and she doesn't want to lose that.
I can imagine why she wouldn't.
So she bought a house closer to where she's at, and it's actually near St. Sebastian, so it's actually much closer to us because she has an apartment in Cuyahoga Falls. So it's much closer to us, and we like that. So Christian is currently she's on vacation in Las Vegas and having a great time, according to Facebook.
Oh, really?
Yes. She sends us pictures and she posts, and looks like she's having a grand time. Our son, Sean, is 3 years younger than she, so he's 24 this year. Sean graduated from Ashland University.
Are we spelling Sean S-C-A-N or S-H-A-W-N?
S-E-A-N.
Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, the Celtic spelling.
Celtic spelling, right.
Spelling of it. Sean is 24. He graduated from Ashland University. He has a degree in exercise physiology.
Oh, really?
He is our athlete, so he's now currently teaching in the Youngstown State University in the area of exercise physiology. He also works as the assistant coordinator for student life and athletics at Tri-C.
That's a big commute.
It is, yeah. But he lives with us currently, but when his sister gets into her home, he's going to move in with her.
Oh, that's nice.
So that he helps share rent with her, and he's a little bit closer to work.
My son and daughter had that arrangement in New York where they lived together. And then she had a boyfriend, obviously. He had a girlfriend. And they would have people come, back and forth and so forth. The neighbors could never figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, my son does have a girlfriend, and it's going on 3 years this fall, so it's pretty serious with them. But my daughter doesn't currently date, but she's enjoying life and the job and being a CPA and all of that. And we have another daughter. She is 10 years younger than Sean. She just turned 14 and just entered her freshman year at Wadsworth High School.
Wadsworth, and she'll be staying here, though, will she not?
Absolutely. We're actually continuing to live in town. The commute to work is only about 25 minutes, and they haven't made it a condition of my employment to move to the Bath Township area. I think one of the other pastors that works there lives actually in Brunswick, so it's it's not a requirement right now, and we really want to get Caitlin through high school here at Wadsworth.
We're going to get to the employment here in a couple of seconds, but could you tell us a little bit more about the progression from birth until today?
Well,
we're married. We have 3 children.
We got married. We had 3 children.
Then you taught somewhere close by here, did you not?
Yep, I taught.
Where?
I taught a couple different schools. Taught in Monroeville. Taught in Sandusky. Went to seminary. And that year that my wife and I lived apart while she was in Muncie teaching and came home on the weekends, I was pastoring the church. I had to take classes because I was a student pastor, and that was a requirement. So I was taking classes. I was sort of a single parent during the week. And then the local high school called, and their choir director quit 2 weeks before school started and asked if I would come teach. So I said, well, I already have a full-time job and I've got all this other stuff, but I talked with the church and they allowed it. So I was also teaching. They called it part-time, but I did have 5 choirs at that school.
There's no such thing as part-time.
Well, there is part-time pay. There's just no part-time work.
Pay, that's right.
So that was an interesting year, and we got through it, and then we were able to reunite. I got an appointment in the Methodist system back here in Ohio. We were in Union City, Ohio. So
now, where's Union City?
Now, it's right almost directly east of Muncie.
Oh, I see. Okay, in the
north
western
of 70.
part of Ohio.
It's on sort of the northwest corner of Dayton area. And in fact, the parsonage for that church was on the state line.
Oh, really?
So when you pulled out of the driveway and went on the other side of this road, you were in Indiana.
Where was your bedroom? Was that?
We were in Ohio. The whole house was in Ohio,
Ohio.
but across
House
the street
was
was Indiana. The church was just down and around the corner. But so it was really kind of complicated because when we would go, she would go to work in Muncie. She could leave our house at 8 a.m. and she would arrive in Muncie at 8 a.m.
That's good.
About an hour commute. But when you came home, say if you came home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you got home at 5.
Right.
So that wasn't so great. But so Union City was a interesting town because it was 2 cities that were one, but part of it was in Indiana, part of it was in Ohio. And you would go to businesses on the Indiana side, and they would say, well, we run on slow time, we run on fast time, you run on Ohio time, you run on Indiana time. So sometimes that worked in our favor. If we had a late night and needed to grab something, groceries or pizza or something, that side of the town would be open later than the Ohio side. So it was an interesting town, and it was a beautiful congregation. And I spent 2 years there. And having been in the university setting and being around my wife and I did some part-time teaching at Ball State, that I just kind of wanted to explore music a little bit more. And so I felt like it was time to maybe take a leave of absence from the ministry. And so I applied to the United Methodist Church and got a leave of absence. That was the summer then I spent in Italy as well, singing. And then I went back to teaching and had a lot of interviews. Actually interviewed in Barberton and was offered a position in Barberton, which was what brought us to this area. And we had friends that my wife and I knew in Bowling Green when we were in school. And then we met up with them again in Muncie because he taught there. And he was born and raised in Wadsworth and had moved back. And so when we were coming...
What was his name?
Bill Bauer.
Bill Bauer.
Bill Bauer. Bill and his wife Patty were friends of ours that we'd known for many years. And when they found out that I'd got a teaching job in Barberton and we were going to be in this area, they said, you had to move to Wadsworth. It's the best city. And so we did.
So Bill Bauer brought you here.
Bill Bauer is to blame for me.
We will be forever grateful to Bill Bauer for having brought you here, because my wife Linda and I were talking just the other day as we were looking forward to this interview this morning. And I have been here all my life, 86 years. And I have never known of a person ever in the city of Wadsworth who had such a glorious voice as you do.
Oh, thank you.
And we do not want to lose you, so I'm so pleased to hear that you're going to be staying in Wadsworth, because we don't care if you move, but you want your voice here. You want your voice here.
Well,
you have one of the most glorious voices. As a matter of fact, when I sat with your mother at this dinner, I remembered now when it was at the our high school reunion, and you sang at the
Okay.
high school reunion, and I sat with her, and she said, I didn't know that Dan could sing until he was 12 years old. Tell us about that story.
Well, the way that I remember it is that my brother had been involved in the music program at school.
Did he sing too, as you do?
He sang a little bit, and he was in the 4th grade play, and he was in the junior high choirs, and we were in choirs in church. And I guess I had a little jealous streak there that he was getting all this attention musically. And so I tried it too and started doing more with music. And then he kind of backed out of music. He's not, doesn't do music anymore. But I kept with it. And, through junior choir and being choir nights with my mother at the church.
Was your mother also sing?
She is. She's a great alto.
Great alto.
She doesn't sing solo-wise, but she sings in the church choir and enjoys singing along to the radio and all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you said that you went to Italy for a year, what did you do in Italy?
Well, it was a program run through the University of Cincinnati. They had a summer training program in Italy. So we were there for 6 weeks, and they had 3 different sections of that program. You could be in the opera. They did a fully staged opera. There was a studio program for younger singers who were just learning some things in college. And there was the sort of other program that was called the I Solisti di Lucca, the soloists of Lucca. And it was for emerging artists who were ready to step out on the stage and take on roles and start singing professionally.
Is that what you did then?
And that's what I did.
Solisti?
I Solisti di Lucca.
Di Lucca.
So I was with the singers, and we gave concerts every week. On Tuesdays, we gave concerts. In Italy, and we were in the town of Lucca, which is the hometown of Puccini.
Right, and it's also the capital of olive oil.
It is
Italy.
a beautiful area. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed my time there. We were there for 6 weeks. We took Italian language class for 2 hours a day for the 6 weeks.
And incidentally, you speak it beautifully.
Well, thank you.
That's my native language.
It was helpful to be there amongst native speakers, and our teachers in the classes could only speak English to us the last 5 minutes of the class.
Oh, really?
And so we really had to do a lot to learn and be quick about it.
Can you still speak Italian?
I can read it, I could sing it, I could probably speak it but I'm a little rusty in terms of the understanding of the languages to go to Italy. I can get by. I was in Germany this summer. We took a youth group from Ohio, and we stopped by a restaurant, and usually you can get menus in both German and English, and we tried to ask for the English menu. And we took them to this restaurant because I had been there before, and we had such great food. And all of a sudden I couldn't think, well, why did we ever think to bring them here? Because they don't only have German menus. They didn't have anything in English. But lo and behold, I forgot they had the entire menu in Italian, which I could read and decipher a bit better than the German. So I was covered either way and helped the students order then. But I love singing in Italian, and so I learned a lot being around native speakers that summer.
We love hearing you sing in Italian as well, or singing anything. I don't care what you're singing. As a matter of fact, one of the most memorable times that I remember in your singing occurred when you conducted the bicentennial men's chorus, which I think was just absolutely outstanding as far as I was concerned. You let me sing in it. You permitted me to sing in it. And anyone who sings with you is always embarrassed because no one can beat you. But I think the name of the selection was the Amen or something like that, and you sang the call and response part. We sang the amens.
Yep.
And honest to heavens, that still rings in my mind. I wish you could do it right now, but I'm afraid it would probably ruin a microphone.
It might, and we have decided to do that this coming Sunday with the choir at Trinity as the benediction of the service.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And so you're going to do your part of it?
And I'll do my part of it.
And can you give it just a wee little bit of it?
Well, it starts out, the actually opening part was written by a friend of mine, a former teacher of mine. And he one Christmas Eve he was performing this, and he decided to write this little snippet up front, and it goes something like, "Oh, let me tell you about the life of Jesus, sent from God in a heaven above. He came to offer life to humankind. His name be praised evermore. Amen. His name be praised evermore." And then the choir comes in and starts singing Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And so they easily to memorize the song because that's all they sing is Amen.
I like that part of it.
Yeah.
But it was also extreme. The audience just was moved.
It's a high energy song and a good way to end a concert, and I think it's going to be a nice benediction for us on Sunday.
Oh, maybe I can come to listen to it.
Absolutely.
I'd like to hear it again. Now then, you spent some time in Italy doing the Usulisti, and then from there, what did you do?
Well, then that's when we moved to Barberton, and I took a teaching job, and so I taught for 2 years. I taught for a year at Barberton, and it was one of those kind of situations where they didn't pass a levy, and I was the last one hired, so I was the first one that sort of had to be let go. And at that point, I decided, this is a confession time, and I'll do this on Sunday too. But at that time, I'd realized I'd made a mistake leaving the ministry, and I really wanted to be back. And so a friend had mentioned that Trinity Church was open, and perhaps maybe I could explore that. So I did, and then eventually that all steamrolled. So when I taught in Barberton for a year, and then went, there was a position open at Buckeye where my wife is at currently, where she was teaching. And so I went there for a year and did some fill-in. And at the end of that year, then I was called to be the senior pastor at Trinity.
That was wonderful. Everyone was pleased in Wadsworth. Of course, your predecessor was very popular too.
Absolutely.
And where is he now, incidentally, Bob?
Well, the two predecessors that we most talk about, Jonathan Knight was just right before me, and he actually works for an association in the Chicago area. But Bob Johnson is retired and lives in the Delaware, Ohio area. He and his wife, Betsy, still live in a retirement community down there. And we still hear from them. They send a note every other month or so to us.
There are two things that I remember about the singing part. First of all, I really enjoyed being with that men's chorus, doing my little part. But the other thing was that one time you were called to lead the national anthem for the World Day of Prayer. And you called me and said, "Caesar, would you help me sing the national anthem?" And I thought to myself, me help you sing the national anthem? And I said, "Yes, I'll be glad to, Dan. I will announce the national anthem will now be sung by Dan Doty." That's as far as I would want to go. The other thing is that for many years I sang solos as well as I could, which is nowhere close to anything that you've ever done. But for the Lutheran Church, for the Methodist Church, for the Trinity and for the High Church in, well, it's in
Out in Doylestown.
Doylestown, but
Yeah.
it's the old.
Old High Church, Old Emmanuel, UCC.
That's right, yeah, Emmanuel ECC. But anyway, when you became the pastor there, I was still on that circuit. And I thought to myself, I'm going to sing in front of Dan Doty. And I came up to you and I said, Dan, how about you sing and I'll preach? I probably couldn't have done either one of the two nearly so well as you. But I was just absolutely humiliated to be able to sing in front of you. But of course, I don't do that very much anymore. But I enjoyed those days. But when you came on board, I think that the entire culture of music stopped and let you become the prime person, and rightfully so. Now, we were beginning to know who you are. We knew what you are and so forth. Now, tell us what started you. You told us what started you in the ministry or the music, some rivalry with your brother and so forth. What started you in the ministry?
Well, my mother likes to remind me that my home pastor that I grew up with during confirmation, that Sunday I was confirmed, said when he stood behind me after the confirmation prayer that I was going to be their next minister. I don't have any recollection of that. But I remember we talked about things like that, vocations in ministry, and I'd always been awed by being in the church and being in the presence of a sanctuary. I always enjoyed the worship service and being a part of that. I liked being a reader, a performer at church. I guess as I had that sort of sense of, it was teaching really what I was supposed to do, thinking about what other things I liked to do and I would enjoy doing and I felt I could do. And ministry sort of kept coming into my head. And so I like to tell the story that I sort of sprang this on my wife one day in the car. We were driving to her parents, and at the time we had 2 young kids, and we were renting a place, and we would love to buy a home and to start, the more adult life. And so we were talking about if we could ever buy a home, and I said, well, I was thinking about, something that would give us a home, and she said, well, what would that be? And I said, a parsonage, and she kind of looked at me, and I said, well, I've been kind of thinking about ministry. And after her initial shock, she said, well, I can see you doing that. And we got down to her mother's. We were down by Columbus, Waldo. And she went right ahead and told her mother about that I was thinking about ministry. And she said, well, I can see him doing that.
No kidding.
No kidding. And then the next day we were back in Bowling Green, and I stopped by a friend's house, and I was talking to her, just chit-chatting, nothing spectacular we were going over, but I said something about maybe considering a new career. And she said, oh, what, the ministry? And so I learned about how folks can be called through other people.
That's exactly right.
And so I got that sense of call through confirmation of other people. And then I seriously started thinking about it and went to my Methodist denomination, the district office, and asked about what it was like and what it would entail to explore that. And they set me along on the process.
That's a nice story. I went to a Methodist college. I'm Catholic, and I went to a Methodist college, Baldwin Wallace. And the reason my whole family went there is that it was the only thing that we could afford. In today's idiom, you would probably think that we went there as mendicants or something, because the entire bill for tuition, room and board, books, and fees was $840 a year.
Wow.
And we had to work to do that. But we did go to the Baldwin Wallace. But anyway, we had it was a pre-ministerial school, incidentally.
Okay.
And we had a young man there who was going to become a minister. And I can still remember, he's just a wee little bit of a fellow. And I said to him the same thing, or asked him the same thing I asked you, what promoted you or prompted you to become a minister? And he said, I looked up in the sky, and there was a big cloud, and it said, GPC. I said, GPC? He said, yes. He said, go preach Christ. And the big cloud was saying that, yes. Yeah. Now, maybe he saw that, I don't know. But I do believe, sincerely believe, that your mother or your wife saying, I can see you're doing that. Your mother-in-law saying, I can see you're doing that. And your friend saying, at the third time, saying, what, the ministry? That is the calling.
Yeah.
And I think that that's exactly right. So we now know, the city of Wadsworth now knows why you became a minister. Before we get too terribly far, because we're going to run out of time before we do this, you mentioned a girl. Her name was Amy.
Yes.
Tell us about Amy.
Well, Amy was a music student at Bowling Green State University. She was a couple years ahead of me. She actually spent her first year at SMU, Southern Methodist in Dallas, in music therapy. But having to work with that segment of the population and the needs and just the emotions that go along with that just was too much for her. So she decided to go straight into music education. She came back, went to Bowling Green State University. I had gone with a choir over the summer on a summer tour after my freshman year, so that was the summer of '85. And when I came back, I eventually moved in with one of the guys that was on the tour and worked on campus in the summer for a bit. And his girlfriend, my friend Randy, his girlfriend lived with Amy, and so when we would do things together, it would just always be the four of us. And,
so you met her that way.
So I met her through. I say Randy, but we've always called him Beef. That's the only name I know him by.
Beef?
His name is Beef.
We have a person in Wadsworth whose first name was, if I can think of it right now, but we called him Beef all the time.
And he's from Dover, so he's not too far from here. But we were roommates in college for a year or so, and like I say, his girlfriend at the time, and now his wife, and Amy lived together. And so it was always the four of us. We'd maybe go grab a pizza, we loved movies. We'd always go see the movies. I eventually, Beef was working at the movie theater, and so I eventually started working at the movie theater, doing concessions or whatever. And so we were just always together. And so that was the end of the summer of '85 that I met her. We dated for a year. In the summer of '86, we got engaged. And there's an interesting story that I need to tell you about my mother and that. And then we were married the summer of '87.
What's the story about her?
Well, in the summer of '86, I worked in Dayton, Ohio. My brother went to the University of Dayton, and he worked in Dayton, had an apartment, and all of a sudden he called me and said, I can get you a job for the summer. It pays really good money. You can live with me. It won't cost you anything. You can save some money for college. So I moved down to the Dayton area. I had been dating Amy for a year at that point. I came back a couple times. I think she might have come back. I might have met her parents. And then that was the summer of '86. So then we got engaged that summer. I didn't know until probably 10 or 15 years later that my mother asked my brother to do that.
Oh, really?
That Amy and I were getting too serious. And she's 4 years older than I am. And my mother saw this older woman trying to take her baby.
Oh.
And she was very concerned. And so I didn't know until 10 or 15 years ago that my mother asked my brother to do that so that we could have some time apart and maybe things would cool off.
Didn't work,
it didn't work at all.
No.
Didn't work.
As a matter of fact, you kind of liked him. Didn't you write a song about her?
I've written a couple things, written some hymns for the kids, and there's a song that I sing from a musical called Once in Love with Amy that I do often.
That's a beautiful, beautiful song.
It is a beautiful song.
It's a tear-jerking, heartwarming song, though. I liked it very much. We sang that for the bicentennial.
Yeah. We that's an old Ray Bolger song that he sang when he was back in his days. So it's a great piece. But
now, when we talk about Amy, we talk about her music background, and she worked at Ball State, and then she wanted to come back to music education in the schools, and she's presently at Cloverleaf. Is that right?
Buckeye.
I'm sorry, Buckeye. She's at Buckeye. What does she do at Buckeye? And
well, she started there as a music teacher, and then they lost a position in music because, of course, they didn't pass a levy too for 17 years. So she actually got called back very late in the summer to come back and teach special ed for 1 year. And so 1 year, and then that position had ended. And then they called her back to teach in 5th grade, and she had both teaching licenses for music and for regular elementary.
Which
so
is
she taught
a good
in 5th
thing
grade.
to do.
It's absolutely. So she's taught in 5th grade ever since, and she started this year in 5th grade. But at Buckeye School, they lost their computer specialist. I think the official title is Technology Integration Specialist. And so she applied for that position, and she's now out of the classroom, and she works with teachers in getting computer technology and programs and things to do with the kids. So she's in charge of the technology for the entire district.
That's wonderful. Let's see, she's 54 years of
Yes.
age right now.
You said it, not me.
Right. That's right. I'll take the blame for it. But she's right on the cusp of that generation that knew computers and didn't know computers. So she does know computers then.
Absolutely. She bought her first one the summer we met in '85. She bought a small Macintosh computer. So we've been Macintosh folks ever since. So for 30 years, she's had a personal computer and knows those things backward and forward.
I can't think of anything more important right now than to have someone teach teachers how to use computers, because they no longer have chalkboards. They have smart boards, and some of the people are actually leaving the profession because they don't want to learn about how to operate a smart board. And if she can help those good teachers to stay there because she's going to be able to teach them how to use that smart board, that's going to be a tremendous service. One more thing about Amy, and then we're going to go back to something else that you mentioned. You talked about her mother and the fact that her mother knew that you should, or not necessarily that she knew that you were going to be a minister, but that she thought that you could be a minister. Now, typically, many people have difficulties with their mothers-in-law. Obviously, your mother-in-law had a great deal of respect and regard for you. How did she know, or how do you think that she knew that you would be a good minister?
Well, her oldest son, John, at the time was a United Methodist pastor.
Oh, okay. Then
and so she knew the job. She knew, she's always been in church. She's been a church organist. She knew what the position entailed. And, you use a lot of being in front of people all the time. You use a lot of the same sort of skills you do in performing, that you're in front of people and you have to have poise and think on your feet. So I think she thought that she read those things that I could do. And having had an older son that she had that was in it, in the ministry, I think she just saw those same gifts and skills in me.
Wadsworth had, many, many years ago, this is 65 years ago, a minister in the Lutheran Church whom we all called Pastor Paul.
Okay.
And Pastor Paul was a pianist, and a ragtime pianist, a classical pianist, a jazz pianist, and I don't know what else he could do. But what he did, what made him popular in Wadsworth, was the fact that he would have his sermons, and then he would sit down at the piano, and he would just regale the population. Now, that part we can understand, because the people who go to a church want to go to church, or usually want to go to church, and they like their minister and so forth. But the high school actually asked him to come to give some kind of a character guidance program to our students, and he did the same thing. Every single solitary student would pack the auditorium, O.J. Work at that time, would pack the auditorium because they wanted to hear Pastor Paul with his music. How do you use your music with your ministry?
Well, people accuse me of maybe singing my sermon. I've never done that. But we've integrated music, stories from lyrics, just in planning maybe a community cantata, the Christmas cantata, making that a service that is rather worshipful through the music. I've always felt it's helped. One of the sayings that I always go back to is that a lot of folks get their theology from a hymn.
That's right, exactly right.
And so they can talk about God and talk about their faith through hymns. And so they're very deeply ingrained in us. And so continuing to use those, continuing to teach through those, use those in terms of when life's moments are stressful, whether it's a funeral service and these lyrics speak to you, or it's a wedding and these things are celebrating the beauty of the day. Just being able to have that sense of what music means in people's lives and using it.
My background is in linguistics, which is the science of language. And one of the things, there are 52 areas of linguistics. One of the areas is what they call the repetitio, which is same thing as repetition, And there are studies which show that people, when you say that they get their gospel words from the hymns, the reason they can do that is that the mind actually has a rhythm. And if the rhythm is in concert with the words, then they can remember the words. And that's probably why they're able to pick out some of the theological truisms because they can remember the rhythm of the words. So you're exactly right. The music does help into people not only to appreciate the service, but also to be able to remember the service.
To remember,
so,
absolutely.
as a matter of fact, I think that I probably am guilty of the same thing. I probably remember more of the gospel messages through hymns than I do through, listening to someone.
Absolutely.
Someone talking about
there's
it.
nothing. I've sat many a time at a bedside of somebody who might have Alzheimer's or something, but we can still sing Amazing Grace because they'll still remember.
They can still remember Amazing Grace. That's exactly right. Now, you're going to be leaving Wadsworth, and that's going to be a sad day for all of the Wadsworth people, whether you belong to the Trinity United Church of Christ or whether you belong to Sacred Heart, as I do, or wherever. Everyone really has an admiration for you.
Oh, thank you.
You've been able to make an ecumenical spectacle out of what we have many, many times called a division here in Wadsworth. And for that you can be blessed, and for that we will be always appreciative. What are you going to do after you leave here, which is what, day after tomorrow?
Monday is my last day at Trinity.
3 days from now. Yeah. What are you going to do?
Well, we're going to continue to live in Wadsworth just because I can still commute to school or
Good.
to church.
We want you to be able to say, we will always continue to live in Wadsworth. Would you say that so that it's on record?
Well, I can't say that at this point. We're committed for the next 4 years just because Caitlin will be through high school at that point.
Okay, good for Caitlin. And I hope that she gets through high school with no difficulty at all. But if she happens to flunk a couple of courses,
has to be held back a couple of years.
That's right.
You're okay with that. We love Wadsworth. Wadsworth is a beautiful, beautiful city,
It is.
Beautiful community, a nice family-oriented community, and it's just we have been blessed to be here, absolutely blessed to be here. So we're not running away at any point or even thinking about it at this point. We love our home, we love our location. We live in a quiet cul-de-sac, and it's been a real nice place for us, a real retreat
you live
for
just
us.
about a quarter of or about half a mile away north of me.
Not far from here at all. So, but I will be commuting up to the Bath Church at that point, and really it's straight up Medina Line Road to Bath Road and take a right, and the church is just down there on the right.
Tell us about the Bath Community Church, and what denomination is it?
It is United Church of Christ.
Right.
It is simply known as the Bath Church. I think officially it's the Bath Church, United Church of Christ. The Bath Church is, I don't know a lot about their history. I'm really looking forward to getting to know their history. They've been around for many, many, many years. They built a new sanctuary in 2004, and that's all paid for. Their membership, I think, on the rolls is just under 900.
Wow.
It's a very large church. There are 3 pastors on staff. I will be the senior minister. There is a pastor for pastoral care that takes care of folks and visits and she's actually a retired RN, so she does, know some things in terms of when we talk about health and how people are doing. She can talk in very good terms about that because she understands that. And then there's a young gentleman, Adam, who's a pastor for youth and family life. And so they have a lot of families coming now and a lot of youth programs. He'll be there for my first Sunday. Then he takes a team of 10 people to Costa Rica for a mission trip.
Wow.
So it's a very engaged community. It's a very giving community. They're very mission-oriented. They also have a very large music program. They have 3 handbell choirs and 3 singing choirs, and they have children's choirs, and they have a lot of activities. They just had their big fall festival this last weekend, a big, huge craft fair. They have I met the crafting ladies, they call themselves, and they work all year making these kind of things, and they sell them. There's a silent auction, there's a dinner. Over the weekend, I understand, and this has kind of been the trend, they make about $12,000. And that money goes to nonprofits in the Bath Township area.
Wow,
to help
that's
where needed.
wonderful.
It's
Usually
not, it doesn't go to the church
around.
budget at all. It does not go in the church budget. It is given away in Bath Township.
It's usually the other way around. The churches are asking for money.
Absolutely. No, they're a very blessed congregation, and I'm looking forward to getting to know them and to be there.
There's another thread, a very small thread at this point, between Wadsworth and the Bath Church, and that is that Elnora Davis was an English teacher at the high school. starting in 1945, which is a long, long time ago, as you can probably know. It's some 71 years ago. And I had her. And then she became very active in the Bath Church, and she was in charge of the ladies, whatever that group is, about 50 or 60 ladies. And I think I told you this story, but I would like to share it. Wonderful people. She was actually, I really admired Elnora Davis. She was a wonderful person. And at the time, I was at the university. I was dean at the university, and she called me, and she said, "Caesar, I would like to have you come up to." I'm sorry, I was not. I was after I was dean. I was the associate provost. And that's part of the story, incidentally. She called me and she said, "I would like to have you come up and give a talk to our ladies." And I was just thrilled because here. My former teacher is asking me to come up and give a talk to her ladies. So I did. And I went up there, and there were about 70 or 80, and they were all dressed in either aqua or pink or white or blue, same colored dresses and so forth. It was just a spectacle, just a wonderful thing. So she got up and she said, she was the president of the organization, and she said, after they had this very short business meeting, reading the minutes and all that kind of thing, she said, "And I'm going to call upon our program chairwoman, and have her introduce Dr. Carino." So she got up and she said, "We are very, very," now these were religious women, "we are very, very much pleased to have today Dr. Carino, the assistant proverb at the University of Akron, to give our talk today."
Oh my God!
I will never forget that. And of course, I was chuckling to myself, but I didn't dare show that the word was provost rather than proverb. But I thought to myself, boy, these ladies are really ingrained in the gospel message. So the only thing that I really know about the Bath Church is that I am considered there the assistant proverb. So when you get there, you check for the assistant
I will
proverb.
look that up.
Tell us more about the transition between here and there. Who's going to take your place at Trinity?
Well, it's just been announced. Usually there's an interim time between settled pastors, and they're looking through the files and profiles of interim pastors who are out there who might be able to help them. They decided at this point for November, December to bring in a supply pastor. He just retired from the Medina United Church of Christ, and his name is Neil Sadler. And so Neil's been around churches the size of Trinity and is a very well-respected retired pastor. So I'm just pleased they're going to be in such good hands. And so he'll be here for November, December, helping them through the holiday season as they continue to go through the profiles of those who might come and be interims. And so hopefully by January 1st, they'll name an interim pastor who will be here. And then after that, they'll create a search committee that then will look through profiles of folks who are looking to come be settled pastors and not interims.
That's going to be probably a long process.
Before I came, it was almost 2 years. And that's quite a long time. So I'm hoping it doesn't go that long because it can be a interesting time. And it can be a challenging time.
It is, right.
And so we want to make sure they get somebody.
And many times those interims can turn out to be the permanent, but most of the times that doesn't happen.
No, most of the time there's something called a intentional interim, and that person just wants to be an interim pastor. That's their gift, is to be an interim pastor. Then there's another category of pastors you can have that can start, and if the folks like them and they want to be considered, then they can continue on if that is agreed upon. But usually you have an interim and then you find another senior or other pastor.
Now, as you leave Wadsworth, is there going to be some kind of a celebration?
Well, this Sunday, following the worship service, they're going to have a cake and punch reception. And they've asked for folks if they wanted to express any appreciation, if they had a card or something they wanted to give to us. They had a basket out the last few Sundays. So I think there's going to be a small presentation of those cards and maybe other words at a small service following the worship in our fellowship hall with cake and punch. And so both my in-laws and my parents are coming, and all my children will be there.
That's nice. There's going to be some sadness on the part of the congregation, I'm sure. How does a person feel who has had such a wonderful time here in Wadsworth and who has been so well revered, it is actually revered, how does it feel leaving something and going to a place where you think that you might be happier, or happy rather, and are not 100% sure? What is that feeling?
Well, it's a very humbling experience as well. And when I sent the letter out to the congregation to tell them, the first line said, "It's with mixed emotions that I announced this." I wasn't saying I'm pleased. I wasn't saying I'm regretful. It's been a lot of different emotions. And I think about myself and the transition, and the good things we started and done. The first Sunday in November, we always have an All Saints service, and folks can come forward and light a candle, and we read the name of a loved one, and we ring a bell, and that's the thing I started. And those kind of things that are special to the congregation, I hope they continue. And they are this year. They're going to have an All Saints service. So I'm very pleased that some of those things that we started and we felt were very important to the life of the congregation, those things will continue on.
Where did you pick that up?
I pieced it together from some other places, and I don't know that we did that in my first church or my second church, but this church, it just became something that we wanted to mark from the folks we'd lost from the last All Saints Day. So in fact, last year when we did it, we had 42 names we read.
We have, in the Catholic Church, we do the same thing. We don't ring a bell or anything like that, but we have a mass for the dead at that time. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe you might have picked it up in Italy while you were there.
No, I don't think so. Maybe some folks told me about it. I read about it. It just seemed like it was a neat thing to do, and to let the folks have that time, maybe even closure time to, just remember their loved one, light a candle in memory of that. It's a very moving service.
Now, as we come to the close of our program, there are a couple of things I would like to ask that are going to be right from your heart. When you came to Wadsworth, Bill Bauer actually asked you to come to Wadsworth to live and so forth. When you came to Wadsworth, what were some of the first impressions that you had of Wadsworth?
Well, just being a small town family community, you could walk along the sidewalks, and you could see people out walking their dogs or playing in their yards. We had lived, like I say, on the state line and out in the middle of the country in Union City, and you didn't really play outside. We lived within a mile of a industrial turkey farm, and so the flies were about this big, yeah. And it was hard to be outside there. And there was maybe one house half a mile away, another house another mile away. So we were pretty isolated. And to come to a community where you could drive through and you could see people walking the street downtown, sitting outside a cafe, you could see people playing in their yards. It just was that real all-American hometown feeling that really impressed us with Wadsworth, and still does.
Now, your kids have been here for about 5 or 6 years?
We have been here a total of 13 years.
13 years. How do you think they're going to feel about leaving?
Well, the older two, this is the fourth church that they've known.
Oh, really?
Now, I don't think about our youngest daughter, Caitlin. This is the only church she's ever known, and the only home she's ever known, the only city she's known. And we're not moving from our home or the city, but this is the only church she's known, and so it's probably hardest on her to move.
Now, will she continue to go to Trinity here in Wadsworth?
She will come to Bath with us.
She'll come to Bath. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, when you go to Bath, and you have 2 other ministers there who are going to be subordinate, actually, and I guess that's the wrong word, but
no, we're a team.
Pardon me?
We're going to be a team.
A team, right. How are you going to make the transition from their previous pastor to you, since you have some qualities that absolutely no one else has?
Well, he was also very beloved, and he was there for 25 years.
Did he sing?
He did not sing.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right. And we'll explore those. They have been doing a lot of work talking about the fact that the next person won't be Mark, and he retired. He didn't leave. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit different in terms of the grieving process. When someone retires, that seems to be a natural thing. When somebody like me moves on and I'm not retiring, it seems to be a different kind of grief. Mm-hmm. So, folks, most of the folks I've talked to at Bath, I went last Saturday to their fall festival and hardly could get through the room because people kept stopping and saying how excited they were that I was coming, and they couldn't wait. And So there's a lot of energy and newness there for them. And
So you already have that, right?
I already have that.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because when a brand new person goes in to replace a person whom they loved, may not necessarily be that they are excited about your coming.
It's not always the case. You're right,
No.
and even I would hear, and I can still hear, well, back when Bob Johnson was here. So people have long memories, and they're good memories, and there's nothing wrong with sharing those. It's just trying to help folks transition from, well, Bob's no longer here, Mark's no longer here, and we have. I like to talk about opportunities. This is an opportunity to be something new.
Something new. They are really going to get something new. Now, for the past several minutes, we've been talking about you, and now I would like to talk. I should say that we were letting you talk about yourself. Now I would like to talk a little bit about you from our perspective, from the City of Wadsworth perspective. The first time I met you was at Bill Bauer's house. We had some kind of a function up there, and band or choir or chorus, and you and Amy were there. And Bill was sitting with me, and he said, "You will never hear another voice the way that Dan Doty sings."
Yeah, that's very kind of you.
And I said, "Where's Dan Doty?" And you were right next to him. I had no idea who you were. So I thought to myself, well, we've heard of people singing, and we heard of people singing, and we've heard of people singing. But then when you sang, we heard someone who could really, really sing. That made such an impression on me that I've always followed in my own mind the fact that you would be here forever in Wadsworth. Well, I figured out another way also to make sure that you stay here so long as your youngest daughter, Caitlin, is going to stay here, and that is for her to find a boyfriend, and that she won't want to leave.
Won't want to leave.
The City of Wadsworth has many, many people. We have 27 different churches in Wadsworth. That is major churches. We have probably 32 if you count some of the ones who come here on an itinerant basis. When I was growing up, we had more churches than we had saloons. We always took that as an element of pride. Of those many, many people, I don't care what the congregation is, they all have an admiration for the Reverend Dan Doty, the Reverend Dan Doty, who sings. We offer our sincere blessings to you as you leave Wadsworth, and say how grateful we are that you stayed in Wadsworth and brought your voice here, and hope and pray that it will always be here with you so that we can enjoy it. Thank you, Dan, for letting us interview you today, and unfortunately we've come to the end of our hour.
Well, thank you, Caesar. It's been great to be here.